Tonight's speaker, Dr. John D. Ferrer, is an educator and former associate pastor hailing from the great state of South Carolina. He's earned degrees in religion, communication, Christian apologetics, and finally his PhD in philosophy of religion. More importantly, John is married to an accomplished apologist in her own right, Hillary Morgan Ferrer. He's very proud of her. Just ask him. John has taught at the high school and undergraduate level, as well as in churches, conferences, and various special events. He's addressed audiences from Texas to Turkey, South Carolina to South Africa, and from North Carolina to Naples, Italy. John was recently employed at Pantego Christian Academy, where he taught for the last 6 years in upper-level Bible courses like ethics, world religions, and apologetics. John has also taught at Tarrant County College in Logic and Philosophy. John currently works as an editor and content developer for an education-based website. Besides Christian apologetics and critical thinking, John is passionately pro-life and encourages everyone in the audience to seriously consider the case against abortion. John's talk today is called Nature is a Jerk, a Critique of Naturalistic Ethics. John was also elected the Sexiest Theologian Alive in 2015 by Theology Illustrated. He forgot to leave that on here. I just wanted to mention that. Speaking on Nature is a Jerk, a Critique of Naturalistic Ethics, please welcome Dr. John Ferrer.
Occasionally, you'll get a discussion, a debate about can atheists be moral? And oftentimes the conversation can go any number of different directions that are fruitless and silly and misguided. I want to kind of get to one of the underlying issues that I think many people are trying to get at but don't quite know how to phrase. The underlying issue, I think, is fairly straightforward. Nature is a jerk. The question standing that I want to try to ask here is, we don't need God to be moral, right? Well, often skeptics, atheists, agnostics, and Pastafarians claim, flying spaghetti monster, never mind, that we can get morality from nature. We don't need God to be moral, they say. We can get morality just fine from naturalistic processes like evolution, brain waves, water cycles, and otters holding hands. On the original post of this on my Facebook page, on my WordPress page, you can click on it and see a video of otters holding hands. It's adorable. But is nature that kind of thing? Are we just putting lipstick on a pig thinking we've made a moral man out of it? If so, we are pretending to get civility from nature when it offers nothing of the sort. People who think nature can give us morality are akin to those girls who think, and this isn't all girls, but those girls who think that their horrible, abusive boyfriend just needs the right girl to settle him down. It's naive to think that you can get morality from that guy. It's just as foolish to think that nature is anything less than a jerk incapable of robust moral stuff. To be fair, nature does have nice and pretty features like rainbows and puppies, but if we really look long at nature from a naturalistic perspective, we find that nature isn't nice at all. Instead, nature drives everything in the universe down to extinction, running all usable energy to zero. Nature kills every living thing. In Tennyson's famous words, nature is red in tooth and claw. Given nature's penchant for killing and destroying everything in sight, nature is a horrible basis for morality. In other words, nature is a killer. Maybe you grant that nature isn't nice, but you contend it could still give us morals, right? Well, sort of. It can force on us all of the thoughtless instincts and meaningless feelings, and we can mistake these for good or bad desires or even morality. But if you mean real morals like moral facts and objective morality, no, I don't think nature can give us that. Nature can give us all sorts of non-moral facts like gravity, geography, and groundhogs. But, yeah, groundhogs, right? But nature is amoral. According to British accented atheist Richard Dawkins, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Now, I normally think Dawkins is wrong about most everything, but if naturalism were true, then his account would fit right in. With no divine guide over nature, no intelligent designer, no personal God ultimately grounding all goodness, then that leaves only mindless nature to do those things for us, or leave them undone. Naturalists typically think of nature as operating entirely by mindless mechanical forces, otherwise known as material forces. That way, there's no room for a, quote, divine foot in the door, implied through kinds of causes that are immaterial or intelligent or personal or goal-directed or teleological or free agent causes. Rather than risk interpreting nature as personal or as having free will, naturalists have tended overwhelmingly to see nature as strictly reductive, materialistic, to see nature in strictly reductive, materialistic terms. That means that for naturalists, nature lacks all moral awareness or moral direction. Nature can't even propose things that could be true or false, since nature doesn't make claims. Nature doesn't say, love your neighbor, or don't sit on porcupines. In this way, nature is libertine. You can do these things if you want or not. Either way, no biggie. Nature isn't judging your behavior either way. With nature, moral claims can never be true or false, since there's no reference point, no truth maker in nature that could make moral claims true or false. It's not like you can find a place in nature where there exists a fact saying people should love their neighbors. You're not going to go on an excavation and hit your shovel on some golden rule. You're not going to go bump into some love your neighbor out in the woods one day. It's not a concrete material kind of thing like that. And it's not even clearly one of those material properties that it would result directly from material stuff. It's a bundle of language that seems to exist but has no explanation in reductive, naturalistic terms. It's either an illusion constructed by people, or it's something else entirely, some radically non-moral something masquerading as morality. Our moral sentiments may reduce to amoral animal instincts or a coerced desire programmed into us by heartless, unguided forces. In short, moral facts are prescriptions as opposed to descriptions. That's how things should or should not be. But nature doesn't do those. Nature has descriptions. Nature has natural facts like people and porcupines. But it doesn't have prescriptive facts like love people and don't sit on porcupines. If you want to sit on a porcupine, that's your business. Nature silently permits everything naturally possible. Whether rape, genocide, or headbutting puppies, you may long for a voice of moral reason, but ultimately, nature is a silent killer. Not necessarily killing, but, you know, I had fun putting together the WordPress article for this, because I could look up all kinds of images of animals being jerks, and usually they were cute animals doing jerk things. So this is one of the examples. So nature is a silent killer. Strictly speaking, if the fully naturalistic account were carried to its end, you and I can't make any claims either, since we'd need to be able to generate meaningful language to do that. But meaningful language, the kind that we can originate, deliberate over, and understand, implies all sorts of things like free will, self-reflection, goal-directedness, also known as teleology, and intention. And that doesn't make much sense in naturalism. Those things tend to get explained away in naturalism too. It's not that they exist, but need some clarification to fit in naturalism. It's more like they don't exist, and yet their shadow persists because it is evolutionarily useful. There is no real goal-directedness in nature, again, according to naturalism, such as intentions, purposes, and ends. When the goal in mind is a bit of meaningfulness in language, whether the goal in mind is a bit of meaningfulness in language or a moral value for which we strive, or even the meaning of life, those goals are not goals at all. They are objects that we may want, but even that ability to imagine something that's not in our possession and then to want it, that's more goal-directedness that Charles Darwin supposedly kicked out of science a long time ago. Most naturalists, however, grant a whole range of mental activities for man, such as desire, language, goal-oriented behavior, and so on. Rather than haggle over that here, let's suppose for the sake of argument they are right. That still doesn't give us the rich sense of morality that we know and we normally encounter. We have no set reason for which we are made. We aren't even made at all, not designed, created, intended, etc. We are accidental outcomes. We are glorified chemical spills. To say that one chemical spill is behaving well and another is behaving poorly assumes errantly that there's some standard of reference by which chemical spills can be judged. But chemical spills aren't supposed to be one way or another. They just are one way or another. There are no intentional ends for which we are made. We are not supposed to love our neighbor, nor respect other races, or treat women and men as equal. We are just chemical spills doing what chemical spills do. One human accident loves his neighbor. The other human accident eats his neighbor. There's no set reference to judge one as good or one as evil. Your very desire for purpose in life is not really your desire. According to the typically reductive materialistic narrative from naturalists, you, that is the self, are really just a glorified meat machine programmed deterministically as a tool, not a person. You are not a locus, a place of causal power. You don't cause anything whatsoever. It's not the causal ability, it's the you that's the problem there. Causal stuff happens within you, but it's not you causing it, because you ultimately has to be radically reconfigured according to a naturalist schema, at least a thoroughly reductive naturalist schema. You are nothing but an instrument in the hands of prior forces. Hammers don't want to hit nails. They are just useful for that function. You are programmed through evolutionary and environmental forces to think, quote unquote, that you, quote unquote, are a locus of individual unique experience with, quote, free will, cognition, judgment, and all sorts of mental faculties. But few, if any of these, exist in the transcendent way that's needed if you are going to be able to truthfully reflect on yourself, a word, or even an idea. None of that actually happens. Instead, your whole sense of self, your mental life, your insights into abstract knowledge, judgment, and thought are all dissolved down to nothing, or nature replaces it all with something entirely different from what you would otherwise think is happening. Okay. The Lego brick universe of naturalism has no place for free will or selves. Nature dictates everything about you, down to the very thoughts and decisions you believed were your own. Nature put all of them there in your brain and then forced you to believe you originated them. Nature is a dictator like that. Or to put it more kindly, nature is... Oh, I left off the boss. Nature's a silent killer boss. It's a boss. Nature is also careless. Nature's kind of like a honey badger. I'll put up the honey badger here. Yep, because honey badger don't care. Nature's kind of like honey badger. It don't care. Nature not only fails to care, it can't care. It can't love or even like you. Nature isn't the kind of thing that can intend good things or bad things. Wishing you well or evil, it doesn't care whether you even exist. It's incapable of wanting any outcomes, general or specific, because it's incapable of intentionality. Nature just does stuff, whether we like it or not, whether it's good or not, whether it's morally coherent or morally incoherent. Nature, according to naturalists, doesn't care at all about how you think it should be. It's going to do what it's going to do. It's stone cold like that. It is a silent killer, stone cold boss. Now, at this point, I imagine I've probably offended or invited the laughter of many atheists in here. I welcome your questions afterwards. But if I was in the skeptic's position here, I would be thinking, come on, we have reasoning. Reasoning is probably sufficient to ground morality. So you might be thinking that we have this and it's enough, but reason is a slippery base for morality. It looks firm and strong, but there's no good place to set morality on it. For one thing, reasonable people disagree all the time. Peter Singer, I was just reading some Peter Singer this week, unfortunately, is a reasonable person, a college professor and the chair of ethics at Princeton. So he should know his stuff. I mean, he had to earn his stripes to get there. And he reasonably argues that infanticide, that is killing babies after they're born, should be legal. He also argues that sex with animals is okay. I assume you disagree and that you too are reasonable. Hence, reasonable people disagree. Second, we can admit that reason is a wonderful tool in ethics, but its value is in discovering moral values, not in creating moral values. Notice I said values, not laws. If there's a value, this is good and that is bad, we can form laws and rules and principles about how to react to that good or bad thing. And those reason can do. But creating a moral value, that's more basic. Not in creating them. It can help in formulating moral laws and principles if we have moral values to work with. But it doesn't produce those moral values in the first place. If it's already a fact that killing babies for entertainment is evil, then we might be able to discover that by reasoning, and then reasonably infer good ethical principles which follow, such as don't watch baby torture, don't bowl with babies, don't assault young Democrats, don't eat Republicans, young or old. But no amount of reasoning can change a real and true moral value. The values are just there. Third, reasoning is a kind of frame, so it needs a picture to adorn. There needs to be moral facts before reasoning can help us deliberate about whether they apply and where they don't, what inferences can be drawn from them and what can't be drawn, and so on. But reasoning, by which I mean logic, is an abstract science that is purely theoretical unless and until it is informed with content in its variables. If X is evil and evil things should not be done, then we should not do X. But unless there's some content for X, then this logic is morally vacuous. It's not telling us morality. It's just telling what would happen if we had the beginnings of morality. Fourth, nature doesn't really help us ultimately in this regard. Nature is mindless. Any transcendent grounding for morality would have to be outside of nature, since nature is ultimately devoid of thought, goals, direction, or moral values. In this way, nature is unreasonable. Nature is mindless. Which brings us to the next one. What about reasoning? Well, nature is a mindless, silent killer, stone-cold boss. Well, what about desire? Perhaps these things we call desires are going to be a sufficient grounds for moral something in a naturalistic worldview. You might be thinking this, but maybe we shouldn't look to the rest of nature for ultimate explanation, but rather look at the human facet of nature to find an immediate, if not ultimate, explanation for morality. I should clarify. Oftentimes when we say nature, we use it in between two different senses. By nature, we could be talking about everything, humans included, or we could be talking about non-human nature. You know, moral, non-moral, non-human forces out there, trees and lakes and rivers and whatnot, animals and such. So when I'm saying nature here, I want to clarify that we can include human beings in there too, and we still have the problems. It's just not as evident. This option seems to be fair, and it even looks to be the most promising, but it has only shallow appeal. Nevertheless, even shallow appeal is pretty appealing, since many of us these days in the internet age, myself included, can be pretty shallow. Desire-based theories are shallow for several reasons. For one thing, our ability for desire might itself be illusory. Nature forced instincts on us, but it's not like those instincts can be presumed correct or reality-based. Those instincts, all they have to be to persist in a naturalistic worldview is useful for survival. They don't have to say anything about truth, they just have to be useful. Nature forces instincts on us. Nature doesn't filter for truth, it just filters for survival. I want to live forever. You may want to be Spider-Man. We all want to gorge on no-calorie desserts and still look great. The mere fact, and by the way, a no-calorie dessert, that's kind of a contradiction in terms. It's like illogical. You can call it a dessert, but if it has no calories, then you're never food? What is that? The mere fact of desire doesn't prove much of anything about the objects of our desire. The mere fact of desire does not prove much of anything about the objects of our desire. But desires are no easy thing to explain if nature is all there is. Desires are intentional acts, that is, an intention towards something. That means we supposedly cause a mental event that we are, quote, about or intend something else that is yet unrealized for us. We don't have it. But this relation of aboutness is weird. Naturalistically speaking, it's an odd kind of thing. It's not a material thing, it's pretty abstract, and it doesn't seem to be reducible to purely material stuff. Aboutness isn't a Newtonian force. Einstein doesn't have a theory of aboutness. Now, maybe you are smarter than me and can give an account of how nature can do that, how nature can generate desire from just material substances, properties, and relations. But I haven't the slightest clue how that would work, or that it's even possible given the categorical divide between is and about, or what's talked about in ethics, the is-ought problem. Ought meaning prescriptions, what ought to be, what ought not to be. Second, that's not even the strongest objection to desire-based theories. Desires aren't all good. This point seems obvious, but bears repeating. Desires can be very, very wrong. We can want things that are bad, evil, and nasty. Our ability to desire can be wrong. For example, lobotomies. We can lobotomize a person and injure their ability to desire what would help them to flourish. We can fail to want things that we should want. We can want things that are impossible. And, of course, our desiring abilities are often quite silly. Anybody with a 2-year-old knows this. Perhaps you've had a child that wants to be a dolphin, or a Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, or Tinkerbell. The very fact that we can have good and bad desires is proof that our desires themselves are not the most fundamental basis for moral good and evil. If the desires themselves can be good or bad, then you need to get deeper to something else to deliberate between which desire is good and which one's bad. Third, building on the last point, we can discern good and bad desires by referring to other, more basic measures. If Jeffrey Dahmer wants to kill and eat a young boy, that's an evil desire, no matter how sincerely he wants it, no matter if nature forced that desire on him, no matter if nature has no prescriptions anywhere in all the universe that could tell us that Jeff shouldn't eat people. We know that Jeff shouldn't eat people, but it's terribly tricky to find a way in nature to translate that prescription, or in this case, a proscription, don't do that, into a natural fact. This problem is what ethicists call the naturalistic fallacy, or the is-ought fallacy. If you think it's easy to solve in naturalism the is-ought fallacy, then you probably don't understand it. Frankly, this was one of the chapters of my dissertation. I had to read a lot of really egghead books on the subject, and it's largely admitted to be still a problem, but a mystery, and set aside its category mystery. We don't have a resolution to it, but we'll move on. Or folks mischaracterize it and use different terms for things and then answer a question that isn't at the core of the is-ought problem. Fourth, there are some kinds of goods outside of our desires. Imagine a beautiful art piece, the last one from the artist before he died. It is still wrapped in paper and not yet unveiled. And now imagine a person who accidentally unleashes dog into an art museum. I don't know why. It's a thought experiment. Just roll with it. The dogs, for some reason, tear the art piece into art pieces. Real value has been lost, but there is no discernible human desire connected to that art piece. The insurance company hadn't insured it yet. The artist is dead and can't want it. The museum didn't know if they want it or not since they hadn't yet studied the piece. Their wall space is at a premium. Maybe they won't want it. And it's the policy of the museum not to sell the artist's work, so they cannot stand to gain financially by selling it to another dealer. There are no human desires connected to that art piece, yet there's a loss of value when it's ruined. The sheer fact of desire isn't enough to account for the most basic grounds of value. Now, granted, the example is from aesthetic value and not moral value, but it suffices to illustrate how values can exist apart from desire. Fifth, even if desire-based theories somehow worked, they would only give us moral relativism. In philosophical ethics, moral relativism is about as popular as C-SPAN. I tried to do my civic duty one time. Anybody tried this before? You tried to watch C-SPAN because you're like, I want to be a smart person. C-SPAN is what smart people watch, right? We watch this and do our civic duty and get informed about government and politics and I can't stand it. Yeah. Why is that? Relativism surrenders too much. When we say rape is evil, we don't just mean I feel like rape is bad, or I don't want rape, or we collectively don't want rape. When we claim that rape is evil, we are referring to a fact that is true regardless of culture, law, or time period. If everyone agreed or no one agreed, rape would still be evil. Relativism doesn't measure up to what we know about evil things like rape. And I've got an article on it on my blog, What's Wrong with Relativism? It's easy to find. I think it's the second one on there. What can we say about desire-based theories? Nature is too robotic to even give us a meaningful and robust account for desires, much less desire-based ethics. Nature's heartless, like a machine. Nature is a mindless, heartless, silent, stone-cold killer boss machine. Almost sounds good if you're trying to intimidate people. Now, still others may try the standard go-to option for naturalists, evolution. When you have a sticky problem, just wipe some evolution on it, and that will clean things right up. But evolution pretty much embodies all that's wrong with natural morality. The engine of evolution is fueled by selective pressure. That means a deadly competition for survival. Nature kills everything through evolution. If nature is mindless and heartless, killing everything, evolution is the henchman doing the knocking people off for him. We call this blood sport evolution. If nature is red in tooth and claw, evolution is the most nobilifying excuse for that bloodlust. And don't forget, nature is arbitrary. According to naturalists, nature works entirely without direction or purpose. That means evolution is arbitrary, operating entirely without direction or purpose. Otherwise, they'd be allowing for intelligent design, and that's a no-no for naturalists. They can't allow purpose into it. Now, to be fair, evolution gave us a dose of charitable sentiments and group loyalty. These are usually the first things that come up when I say naturalism doesn't give us morality. They say, well, what about groups of dogs that have altruistic behavior, or dolphins that will protect each other? But it's not clear how we get the vast moral world of sophisticated and elaborate moral values, rules, and laws from that handful of selfless behavior. Plus, nature could, in the next generation, take all that back and give us an appetite for old people to where we kill and eat everyone 55 and older. Sorry, Mom and Dad. Evolution, just like nature, just like honey badger, don't care. It could just be screwing with us and we'd never know. Evolution may have forced dolphins to have what looks like social ethics, but evolution also made sharks eat cute baby seals. Evolution may make babies look cute so we'd want to protect them, but it also makes some people ugly. Should we kill them because of evolution? No, evolution is still a terrible way to justify ethics. Now, if you're not convinced from me, because I'm Christian apologist, I'm obviously biased, Richard Dawkins admits we want to avoid basing our society on Darwinian principles. We want to avoid basing our society on Darwinian principles. You might have heard the term social evolution. This is a bad word. This is basically eugenics. A lot of the bad experiments that went on in the first half of the 20th century to try to create a super race or an improved society, oftentimes it was people trying to act on evolution. And evolutionary ethics took on a really bad connotation as a result. And nowadays, people recognize there's no guarantee that the changes that evolution brings about are good. They're not bad, they're not good, they're just changes according to nature. At best, evolution would explain why there might be the appearance of some ethical behaviors, namely the appearance of ethical goods and evils, which can aid survival. It's not clear that evolution addresses any ethics except survival issues. But it doesn't even address these. Ethically, if all of life on Earth evaporated tomorrow, nature has done no wrong or no good. It just sits in cosmic indifference. As far as evolution is concerned, it does not matter whether we butcher a cow in a painless way or not. But we recognize that even for beef eaters, we shouldn't torture a cow slowly till we feast on its flesh. Evolution doesn't inform that ethic. Yet, that ethical principle, don't torture cows, still exists. Also, evolution fails to address moral truth. Evolution is neutral on all matters of truth. There's nothing in evolution that can ever make any moral claim true. Evolution is not prescribed that any species survive. It is not prescribed that one species should mate for life and another species should whore around the neighborhood. Evolution might force a given species to behave one way or another, but that's determinism, not ethical prescriptions. Evolution is not coercive. Evolution is too coercive to cooperate with free will. Yet moral choices require free will. Suppose a computer is programmed to restart, you'll like this, I'm sure, is programmed to restart and inform the NSA of your search history every time you let it sit idle for 2 minutes. Your computer's going to restart and email your search history to the NSA every 2 minutes you leave it idle. That computer is not doing good. It's not doing evil. That computer isn't culpable for anything. The programmer, perhaps you've got a deviant roommate who likes to run pranks on you. That's the one who's to blame. But according to naturalism, there is no intentional program anywhere in the works. Even computer programmers are programmed. So it's just tools working on tools, and we haven't gotten to an agent who originated any of it. Evolution didn't have a choice, and it didn't allow any choices either. Nature and evolution have forced all behavior on us, so we cannot fault a drug addict, an egomaniac, or even Kanye West. They can't help it. Evolution made them behave like that. I thought the Kanye West thing would get a laugh, but maybe it's not as much of a punchline anymore. Maybe it's kind of mean now to be picking on him. Yeah, sorry, Kanye. I'm sure he can hear me. Yeah, Kanye knows all. Let's see, where was I? Put another way, evolution has not prescribed any behaviors, good or bad. It has not prescribed anything whatsoever. Evolution doesn't do prescriptions. That's what doctors do. Prescriptions are complicated mental things, and evolution and nature have no mind, no ability to prescribe anything. Instead, evolution explains some of the interesting organic splatters squirting out from underneath the gargantuan vice press of nature as it summarily crushes all life into oblivion. Evolution is a roving batch of accidents with no destination, no purpose. So, evolution is a roving, mindless, heartless, silent, stone-cold killer boss machine. Now, to sum things up about nature, bringing it to a close, if you had a boyfriend or a girlfriend who was a roving, mindless, heartless, silent, murderer, coldly indifferent to anybody else in the universe, a genuine totalitarian dictator, would you consider that person to be a good friend? The friend part is unlikely, the good part is absurd, but nature is all that and a bag of crap. nature is a jerk. Now, you might be thinking that religious ethics are no better, which I hear all the time. Oftentimes people say, yeah, all that I grant it, but your ethics are worse. You might agree with Richard Dawkins in his characterization of Yahweh as the, quote, most unpleasant character in all of fiction. But I'd like to suggest humbly that you look again seriously at the moral framework of biblical Christianity, bearing in mind the apparent failure of naturalistic grounding. Naturalism seems, at least given the kinds of determinism and mindlessness that we see happening among naturalistic theories, it seems to be a failure there. Now, folks might heavily critique Christianity, for example, and turn the other way because they know all the faults here, and this looks like the best alternative because they haven't looked too deeply. I want to suggest if you look deeply, it might actually be worse over here, and perhaps you didn't look deep enough over on this side. When the naturalistic option isn't very flattering, we might be forced to reevaluate the leading alternative. There might be other alternatives, but I'd commend Christianity to you. Indeed, upon further observation, I think you'll find there's more to biblical Christian ethics than the slave passages and apparent barbarism against the Canaanites. There's more to church history than the Crusades and the Inquisition. And there's more to Christianity than all of the hurts and harms inflicted by Christ's followers. There's more to Christ himself. Many other things that Jesus did, were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the whole world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Thank you.
If we're ready, we'll start with Q&A. Two very simple rules for Q&A. Number one, keep your question less than 2 minutes. If you have more than 2 minutes of what you want to share, see me about having your own consortium. Number two, keep the question germane to the topic. If you're unsure of that, ask your question to your neighbor. If they say what, don't get on a live mic that's being videotaped and ask it. I think that's it. We'll start right here. Dr. Ferrer.
Hello. Are we good?
Am I on?
All right, good. So thank you very much for having the forum. And so on the topic of nature, you spent a lot of time tonight talking about nature and the nature of morality. I just want to bring up one point, and then I'll ask my question. The nature of morality, you know, a car driven by a Christian, the car doesn't care whether or not it runs over an individual.
Okay.
Whether or not it's driven, you know, the Christian cares, the car doesn't care.
Okay.
All right, so that's my point. And, you know, going into morality, you know, I'm an atheist, and I care whether or not I tip everybody here, right? God doesn't.
God doesn't care?
No.
Okay.
No, hold on. Let me finish my question. So if I leave tonight, everyone here would care, and I come here often, as they all know. And if I left here without tipping, I would not be welcome back here, as everyone here, including the managers and everyone know. They would be upset with me if I didn't come back. So my question to you is, since I don't believe in God, is your point tonight, you know, because I am a moralistic person, I'm
moralistic.
I'm a moral person.
Okay.
I'm a very moral person.
Okay.
I volunteer. I do a lot of volunteer hours. I'm married. I have children, and I've been very moral for all my life.
Okay.
And I've grown up. I'm a grown-up individual.
Okay.
I work. I pay taxes.
I got you. Moralistic I understand to be kind of a hyper-moralism as opposed to just moral, which would mean...
No,
which I think is the sense you're using.
Whichever verb you would like to use.
Okay.
I am a moral person. whatever you would like to call it. I don't murder people.
Okay.
You know,
So
I don't rape people.
The
I
question.
don't do any of those. I don't break the
believe
law. I don't speed when I leave here.
Agreed.
You know, I don't do anything like that.
What's the question?
Well, I'm trying to ask you, since I don't do any of that, I mean, is God like reaching down into me, and whether I don't believe in him or not, is that your contention?
So the question is,
even though I don't believe in him or her?
Is your question that I'm not sure I understand the nature of the question, because I think what you're asking is, are the only moral kinds of things that you could be dealing with, would they have to be, according to my theory, some divine intrusion, like God's hand reaching down into you and making you do more stuff?
What I'm asking you is because I'm moral.
Yes.
Because I don't do
Yeah.
immoral things. Because
Okay.
I am moral and I don't believe in God, why am I moral?
Okay, one of the simplest confusions I think that oftentimes happens in this debate, and I think in this discussion, and I think it might have happened already tonight, is the contention that naturalism doesn't. I contend that naturalism doesn't justify.
I'm not talking about nature.
Hold on a second.
I'm not talking about nature.
I'll get there. Naturalism doesn't justify morality, but you don't have to believe in God to still use his morals. You don't have to affirm anything about supernaturalism to still be working in a morally charged universe that God created. So I would, as a Christian theist, I would suggest that God lets people still utilize moral values, moral knowledge. God created us with that ability. And atheists oftentimes are more moral than some of the theists I know, frankly. Just being honest, there are some pretty nasty theists. There's some pretty nasty atheists too, but the average ones I run into in these kinds of events, oftentimes they're fairly moral, go to soup kitchens, they're not teaching their kids to rape and pillage or anything. And so you can deal in that moral stuff at a practical and normative level. In philosophical ethics, when I teach the subject and how it was taught to me, there's meta-ethics, normative ethics, and practical ethics. We're all familiar with practical ethics. This is how you implement ethics. This is how you do good. Normative ethics is the theories and framework you come up with for prescribing what's the good things that we should do. It's going to inform your practical ethics. But underneath all of it is meta-ethics. This is where you get to your most abstract philosophical problems, such as what makes good good? What is the truth maker for a moral claim? If you and I know don't sit on porcupines, we shouldn't do that. That could be a non-moral thing, in which case we're not dealing in morality and it's not that troublesome.
Yeah,
or
but
it could
my
be a moral
contention
thing.
is that everybody here is society. Everybody here judges me, not God. He does, she does, he does. That is the person that judges me whether or not I'm a good person. Yeah. Therefore, that's who I'm good. You know, my parents, my wife, my child, my sister, my brother, he does. Those are the individuals that judge me, the law. That's who judges me as to whether or not I'm a good individual. Therefore, and if you go to church, you're churchgoers.
Are they capable of judging you correctly?
Sure.
Okay, what's the reference point for telling whether their judgment of you is correct?
Well, society changes.
Okay, so
it's clear society changes because 100 years ago, society was different than it is today.
So if society
1,000 years ago, society was different than it is today.
You must be a privileged white person who's a racist. If someone says that because you're white,
right.
And I've known white people
100 years
and they're
ago,
racist,
100 years ago, it's different.
Is that a correct
200 years ago,
judgment or
slavery
incorrect?
was okay.
No, I didn't ask about 200 years ago.
100 years ago, it was okay to beat your wife.
Is that a correct judgment or an incorrect one?
It was an incorrect one, and there are incorrect judgments today.
And the reference point would be your knowledge of your mental state. Are you racist or are you not? If we're talking about whether you're a good person, and a person says, oh, you're not a good person, what's the reference point?
So my question to you in that reference was it okay 200 years ago for God to be okay with slavery?
Slavery, interesting. You should bring
Or was
that
it
up.
okay
That's
to
all
rape women 200 years ago?
Let's see here.
Or was it okay to kill your slave 200 years ago? Okay. That's my point. If it was moral 200 years ago, why is it not moral now?
I would suggest it wasn't moral 200 years ago.
All right.
And it's still not moral.
Okay.
Now,
but in the Bible it
practically
was.
speaking, it's-
In Leviticus it was.
Okay, slavery in the Bible. Oh, where'd it go? Ah! I have this slide worked up, and it's
No,
so
it's
wonderful.
okay, because you
Okay.
did mention that in your speech, and that was fine.
Okay.
In the last 30 seconds, you talked about that.
Okay, I want to give other people a chance to talk because
Fair enough.
you're covering several different
You're
layers
right.
of question here. But regarding slavery, whenever someone brings up slavery, for example, slavery in the Bible promotes slavery. The Bible does not promote slavery. The Bible does describe slavery in case law models of if this, then that. Case law is very different from apodictic law. That's a fancy term that means this is good, that is bad, do this, don't do that. It's just a simple statement of what should or should not be. Those are apodictic laws, and they come with consequences or punishment extended to them for breaking this rule. Apodictic law. Casuistic law or case law says if this is the case, then this is better than that. Now,
So it's okay for any
I'm
law.
not done yet. Hold on.
But it's
hold on.
okay for
I'm not
any
done yet.
time
Hold on.
for
I'm not done
somebody
yet.
to be a
Hold
slave.
On. Hold on. I'm not done
I
yet.
just want to make a point.
The answer to slavery as a subject, this is big and complicated, and you kind of have to coach people through the historical context. Because when I've tried to do this with Matt Dillahunty, for example, he actually said, I don't care about the historical context. Well, then you don't care about what the Bible means. Because historical context, and context generally, is what tells us, what helps us to know what that text means. If folks don't want to know about the context, then they don't want a biblical text, they want a proof text. And the historical context, for example, is that the Hebrew word and the Greek that is used for slave is a broad term. Sometimes it does mean chattel slavery, that is property ownership that's race-based. But nowhere in Scripture is there promotion of kidnapping on the basis of race and, for example, sex slavery. I heard Steven Pinker make that claim in a really big, long book I'm reading now, and that's just not what the text says. I would challenge him to go do more sound theology and prove his claim about it, because it's not what the text says, because, again, he was ignorant of the historical context. When someone brings up the slavery is promoted in Scripture context, I would ask, what kind of slavery? Usually most people don't know the different kinds. They haven't really looked that deep. Their assumption is anachronistic, importing our American antebellum slavery context into a first century context, as if abolition were even feasible socioculturally back then. They don't necessarily consider prisoner of war slavery or debt slavery, or the fact that overwhelmingly most slaves, it was voluntary. Slavery was a means of absolving a tremendous debt, because they didn't have bankruptcy courts, because they didn't have standing police, they didn't have millions of dollars in banks to be able to finance loans. So if you went into debt, this person shouldn't have to pay for it. So you need to pay for it yourself, and that's one of the purposes of slavery. Now, there's a whole lot that could be said on it. I've got a whole presentation. I'll try to make it available on my website.
Fair enough. I'll leave you with one more point.
I
The
think-
Bible is the Word of God, and I'll leave you with that.
Agreed. Agreed.
Hey, what's up, John?
How's it going, man? Long time no see.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Can you step a little closer with my?
What's that?
I can't hear you.
Sorry. So you mentioned the is-ought thing. In my mind, and this is one of the big reasons I left Christianity. I mean, I left Christianity because of evidential reasons and so on, but this is one
Okay.
of the reasons why Christianity is probably like a little unsavory to me.
Okay.
There were people I knew who weren't Christian, and they were supposedly going to spend eternity in torment, right?
Okay.
In my mind, I don't know exactly how I would respond to this, but some people have asked me, if all the facts were true about Christianity, if there really was a hell that non-believers were going to, and a heaven that Christians were going to, and so on, what would your response be? And for a long time, I wasn't sure exactly what the answer for that was, but I would like to think that I would decide not to worship a God who would send some of my best and dearest friends to eternity in torment. That just is very distasteful to me. And I think that goes to the is-ought question of, even if you say that ethics is a certain way, that does not necessarily, even if you say that God says you should do these things, that doesn't automatically make them right. Even if the situation is a certain way, that doesn't automatically make it so that I have to, so that I should respond in a certain way.
The ultimate grounding for good, such that it's logically and categorically impossible to get to a more basic ground of good besides God? What if there's something beyond God that even God has to appeal to where God could be judged against a standard outside of him?
Yeah, basically the whole, that whole dilemma. Like, I have a hard time trying to figure out why morality is so important, what's grounding it, because if God just says something, why do I have to automatically think that that's good? And if you bring up things
I don't think it's good because he says it. I think it's good because he says it because it flows from an irreducibly basic moral something, which is himself. It's not his saying that makes it good. It's already good before he says it, logically speaking.
But what are the components? If it's not just, I mean, sometimes that sounds like, well, it's God's nature that makes it good, but we all have a nature. But what are the components that make it
to some extent, my answer is probably not going to be as clear as you would like. I expect that. I'll try to dignify your question, though. Ultimately, every system that we could come up with, theistic, non-theistic, atheistic, is going to have some level at which to get beyond it is mysterious. We just get to some point where we can't explain any deeper. That's just as deep as it goes. I would suggest that with naturalism, especially materialistic forms of it, you can get a step deeper, but you're still going to have mystery at the base of each system.
Right.
The mystery is, how is it that there could be some kind of immaterial good that's coterminous with a mental thing we call God? But while that's mysterious, I would say it's less mysterious than, say, how can we have oughtness about purely material stuff? I don't think material stuff has oughtness to it. I don't know of an ought in nature. It's not a material relation. It's not a physical something. And so it doesn't seem like it's the kind of thing that objectively exists in nature.
But it's just another thing. Like, God is one thing, people are one thing, the wall. Like,
I don't think mind is just another thing compared to, say, bricks and mortar. I think mind is a categorically distinct kind of thing that I would suggest naturalists don't really have a great account for even human minds, much less a divine mind. I don't really make that case here, so I don't want to go there. That would get a little bit off topic, but a divine mind harmonizes with the fact that most all the morality we encounter, is mental stuff. It's hypotheses about what should be, but they don't exist. They're not real. They're not past, present, or future. It might be good for me to eat right. That's a good thing for me to eat well. You know, I could lay out the whole food pyramid here. Even if it never in fact occurs that I eat well, it's still a good thing. Well, how can it be a natural fact if it doesn't exist in the past, present, or future? That's not a material kind of thing. That's a property that makes sense with minds if the mental aspect is real and not explained away as just more matter. And so I would suggest that getting deeper to a mind, especially a transcultural, beyond human kind of mind, that's going to give you leverage to judge between, for example, relativism problems such as one culture disagrees with that one, but there's no supracultural being to determine whether killing all the Jews for the Nazis is wrong. Well, if that culture agreed on it, conventionalism says then it's good. Or if one culture says slavery is good, well, who are we to judge? Their convention has already ruled. Well, we kind of think we know that those are wrong. But that's appealing to something that's outside of culture, and unless you've got a mind that's outside of culture, you haven't satisfied the criteria needed for a moral leverage against whole cultures.
Can I ask another question?
I think the line's pretty short. You could ask it after him. I want to give as many people a chance as possible. Yeah. Well, thank you for understanding. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Ferrer, for coming. I know it takes
Appreciate
a lot of work that gets into these presentations, so appreciate you doing this. I really enjoyed the talk, by the way.
Appreciate it.
So I'm going to give you the worldview I come from to help you understand. I am a Christian. I'm also a biologist, and a lot of times, as you might be well aware, in the fields of biology, you look at behavior. Specifically, the mammals is the main one. When you look at insects, don't really have much of that. But the mammals exhibit a lot of behaviors, and you see lots of interesting things. And so what I want to ask you, the question is how you can encourage me as a Christian in the field of biology, taking the theory of ethics that you have and how I can apply it to my profession. And the people I talk with a lot, we look at the animal behaviors and then we take that and extrapolate what might be causing this behavior. And I could tell you 99% of the time they say, well, evolution. I like what you said in your presentation, how you said just evolution, they just slap it on the bread and that kind of answers the question. Yeah. But I often like to think, how would you suggest that I could take that opportunity and use it as a catalyst to jump into a conversation with my fellow biologists who might not have the same worldview as I do? How could I take the talk you had and apply it to ethics? I guess to wrap it up in one question, biosociology. E.O. Wilson is a very popular one of that.
Yeah.
And so can you give me some help on how I might take animal behavior, evolution, and apply that in my witness as a Christian to help them come to Christ? It is kind of a big question.
That's tough because I tend to be very cynical about efforts to extract anything ethical for humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. And folks will bring up, for example, they'll say some higher order apes have homosexual behavior, so we need to consider that ethically acceptable, whatever. Or they'll say, you've got this practice of altruism among packs of dogs, and that helps to justify something. But you also see monkeys throwing their poo. Some animals are really good at taking care of their young. Other animals eat their young. Now, if I understand it correctly, from an evolutionary standpoint, our animal parentage, the closer you get to the evolution into humanity, the more similar traits you're likely to expect. And you might get at least some clues about morality, assuming it's just a relativistic, arbitrary product of evolution. You might get some clues about it from, say, the higher order apes. I challenge that. I ask them, which ones should we account for? Which ones should we get our ethics from? Because a lot of apes are sociopaths. I mean, they're just really bad dudes. And that doesn't really tell us much about humans. It tells us about apes, how they act, but it doesn't tell us how we should act. And I go back to the Aesop problem, prescription versus description. You could describe even a human society all day long without saying in any of that where we get a prescription from it. You can talk about, I was a sociology minor in college, and you can talk about behaviors of people in groups all day long and never get any conclusion about what we should do. The should comes from the scientist. The scientist he imports the values that he's gotten either elsewhere or he knew it basically. I'm a natural law theorist, so I think atheists can know the good without having to read it in a holy book. So they might bring their values into the picture and then test according to that and filter their interpretations according to that. But I don't know. I think the best way to get those conversations going is, number one, be real, don't be goofy. Probably Jesus t-shirts at work might be might shut down the helpful conversations you could have. Be genuinely interested in the stuff they're talking about and they're looking into, and be a hobbyist enthusiast about the issues that are coming up. You might find, for example, someone someone might be like some feminist, and in my experience, you'll have to be extremely quiet, if not stay silent, at all times when talking with a feminist. I'm probably inviting more harm now than before, because I'm so foreign to the culture there, and I walk into it and I'm going to offend people, and that's because I bumbled in there ignorantly, not knowing what I was doing, not knowing the values that they share, not knowing the terminology that they use, and not knowing how they and I are alike. And so there's still a they to me. And that's part of the problem. So when you're talking with fellow biologists, don't let it be a they. Let it be an us, a we, in a shared experience, trying to find answers to the kinds of problems that are plaguing you alike. And I think that's going to be your best bet to identifying useful roads of apologetics.
Answers the question. Thank you very much.
On the topic of sexual ethics, those outside of Christianity will often critique Christianity's views on sexual ethics, saying they're oppressive, they're unfair, such as homosexuals have no path to getting married and living in a monogamous relationship, or that maybe there's the idea that it's actually better to not save yourself for marriage so you have some experience before you get there. Various and sundry ways of looking at it. How would you respond to the person outside of Christianity who would claim that their ethical sexual system is actually better than ours based on the idea that theirs allows more freedom, allows more pleasure, more happiness in their lives?
Well, pertinent to the talk, if someone came and someone was asking me that question, I would say, what do you mean better?
Well, I would
Better
think,
than what?
I would think that those outside of Christianity would say that it's better as in it's happier, it's more pleasurable, you can do whatever you want, whereas within Christianity you have a limited number of things you're allowed to do.
So more freeing, more pleasure.
Right.
So more freedom, more pleasure. How is that better than less freedom and less pleasure? Given naturalism.
Well, given naturalism, I would say within naturalism the highest good is human pleasure.
So you're asserting that the good. Who's asserting this?
That would probably be the problem, wouldn't it?
Okay.
The source.
Yeah. Which, by the way, we probably agree more than I'm letting on now. I agree that generally speaking, pleasure is a good thing. We should seek to promote pleasure. We shouldn't be trying to harm people and cause suffering. I think marriage is a wonderful good. I generally promote that. I've spoken on the subject of gay marriage on David Smalley's podcast. You might be able to look me up on there and get a more extensive treatment of that. But I think it can still come down into the pragmatics. Dealing in the meta-ethics, though, practical ethics is one thing. Dealing in the meta-ethics at a base level, I don't know where there's any oughts given naturalism. If a person says, I prescribe this, or I say this, I'd say, and you're an authority beyond yourself. Why? How? And where did you get the ability to be about anything that's not just you? And what's this you going on? Because the mentality, the aboutness, or what's called, in this case, teleology, I think those are really odd things that don't look like material stuff. They don't look like material properties or material relations. And so I'm not willing to grant, I'm too skeptical of those to grant the naturalist and skeptic those kinds of things to deal with from a purely material basis. And so I'd inquire at that level. And if they had a good enough answer, maybe we could get into some of the pragmatics, and I could say, here's why I think, for example, gay marriage might not be the best policy. Here's why I think Christians can support it. Here's why I think Christians can't support it, and you be the judge. And that's how I would probably approach it. But pertinent to the talk tonight, I get in the meta-ethics and say I didn't see any justification for an ought in any of that.
Good,
okay?
Sorry.
No, it's great.
So the question I wanted to ask again is like, I don't. So where is God getting his ethics from? Because it's like, on the one hand, you say, well, he just gets it from. You seem to kind of hint that he gets it from all the information that he has. Mm-hmm. But then again, you say, well, he transcends things. So it's almost as if, and this is something that's kind of frustrating a lot of times in talking with Christians with certain very conservative principles and trying to defend certain marginalized groups that I care about very deeply.
Yeah.
I say, well, what about this person? What about the things that are going in their lives? Yeah. And their answer is always, well, God transcends that. God's morality transcends that. God's morality transcending things can become I won't want to say an excuse, but it has
It can
maybe
be
not-
used as an excuse.
Maybe
Yeah.
not your particular definition of God, but it's been used in very disturbing ways to cause genocides, to cause what I would think are, some of the disturbing things that happen in the Old Testament and so on. This God transcends things narrative is a way to just, seems to, in actual practical everyday living and talking to people, seems to be a way to dismiss human concerns. But yet when I try to say, okay, where is God basing his morality on, is people tend to try to defend it using, as you've just used a little bit, I think, recently, using logic, using reason, using people's emotions, that type of thing. So I'm wondering, okay, if God is transcending everything, then isn't that just like hijacking everything that we're thinking and feeling? And if God is getting it from actual information, then why can't we just use that information ourselves to try to figure it out? And how do you know that God is using information to come up with the best possible morality? How do you, as a human being, have that knowledge?
Great question. I want to make sure I dignify all the different parts of your question. I gather there's a question about the transcendent narrative and how
Right.
people punt to that and use as a coverall.
Right.
And then where does God get his knowledge or get his morals from?
Yeah, and if it comes from if it's justified as it often is by reason or by human emotion or what we want to be true, it just seems like the Christian oftentimes is doing double step a little bit. Like, okay, God is based on all these things, like, people's emotions and all that. But then the moment they contradict that, then the Christian seems to jump on the other side and say, well, God transcends it all.
Well, there's a lot there. You said God is based on all these things, and you mentioned emotions. I don't think God should be
just as
based
an
on emotions.
example.
You're talking about like religious experience? That's where we came to
Well,
that?
I'm saying, that's not the only thing. People might use emotions, they might use logic, they might use
Oh, okay.
biology.
Any of the above.
But
Yeah. Okay.
So they use that to support God's morality,
Okay.
but then when it contradicts it, they're like, oh, God transcends all of that.
Okay,
And I'm
yeah.
saying both are kind of.
Yeah, it could be inconsistent. We're applying different rules for different projects, and then we want to bring it all together and say that somehow there's this cohesion within a Christian
Right.
ethic.
So on the one side, we don't need God, and on the other side, God is just basically hijacking human emotions. And
Okay, let me see if I can respond to this respectfully. First, I want to say it's a great question because I see people using God that way. I want to warn people, and I have a slide, it's projecting right now, it's beautifully projecting. Is Christian ethics any better? It can be. Christian ethics, I suggest, can be, but there are many ways to veer off track. And just saying God told me so is no safeguard by itself. We have to still beware of utopianism and cynicism. Utopianism and cynicism. Hyper-fundamentalism versus libertarianism. I'm sorry, libertinism, not libertarianism, not the political party. Third parties are fine, that's fine. Anti-intellectualism versus rationalism. Those are all ways where people might, for example, use this transcendent narrative and abuse it because they've made God out to be like just an abstract entity, and he's not distinct from numbers. They can't really deal with God except that he's immaterial, and they just leave him out there. And I don't think that's biblical theism very well. And yet some rationalists within the Christian faith might do that. We do have to beware of scripture twisting. We have to beware of native pitfalls of each theological system. Baptist, for example, my home tradition, tends to be hyper-individualist. We'll split over carpet color if we disagree on that. Much less theological doctrines. Calvinists oftentimes have the air of being the frozen chosen, or the charismatics oftentimes have the air of being chaotic. And each religious tradition has its penchant for a native kind of theological abuse or practical abuse. We have to beware of a Christless morality where folks are saying, let's look at the Old Testament, let's Bible beat with these Old Testament rules, but they don't really take seriously Christ's behavior, and they want to go all to Leviticus, and they want to reintroduce Old Testament punishments, but they don't want to take a serious look at Christ's behavior. He was modeling this stuff as a chief educator for us. And then we need to beware of cloaked ambitions. A lot of people will use Jesus' language to cover their very unredeemed ethics, which aren't very ethical. Now, to get to the heart of your problem with the transcendence thing, I think it is valid when used correctly to say that God's ethics operate in a way that are consistent with being a perfect, eternal, infinite being. That's what we would expect if God is the way classical theism describes him. And that would give us some sort of transcendence. But Scripture doesn't teach that we're wholly unlike God. It says we're like God. We're not God, but we're not entirely unlike God. We're like God. And the doctrine is the Imago Dei. So we would expect some of it, some of what we know in terms of our moral knowledge, to be consistent with the character of God. But God has a different prerogative that he can operate with legitimate authority, just like a judge in a courtroom operates with different authority than the bailiff, than the attorneys, than the plaintiff. There are different levels of authority in our judicial system. I would expect no less from someone who has all power and all knowledge. So that addresses the transcendence something. Where does God get his ethics from? I think he gets it from himself. I think we have an irreducible basic. Our deity is functioning in an explanatory way the way a materialist has nature. But I think ours is a better explanation because ours is a mental thing and theirs is not.
But isn't that a tautology?
Yeah. Yeah, God is God. God is good, and God gets his goodness from God, which is good. Yeah. But tautologies aren't illogical. Tautologies just don't prove anything beyond the statement itself. A thing is self-consistent. That's the nature of everything.
I mean, couldn't that be abused to justify very, very disturbing pictures of God?
It can and has been. It can and has been. That's
so,
one of the things I didn't specify
here.
Let
that tautology in the door.
I'm sorry?
Once you let that tautology in the door and you just admit it, like...
I think we're talking past each other in terms of what a tautology is. A tautology is very informative. To say good is good, it's telling us, it's reaffirming logical basics, it's identifying the thing for what it is, as opposed to good is bad, as in, I'm bad, you know it. We've switched our terms, but it's a different sense. If I say God is God, that's still telling us something. God is self-consistent. God is not inconsistent. God is not an absurdity. God is not incoherent. God is logically the same as himself. And everything that is true of God is true of him at any time, at any point, because of the definition of God. So it's logically informative, but if you use that as an argument, it's a bad argument. It's a fine claim, but it's a bad argument. Does that make sense? God is good because God is good, therefore God is good. That's a tautological argument, and it hasn't gotten you anywhere. But if it's true, if premise one is true, it's still true.
I don't understand what's making God good. Like I could say,
what's making nature good for a naturalist to get his morality from it?
That really depends on how you define good. I mean,
let me see if I can throw out the best naturalist answer I've heard. The best naturalist answer I've heard to get around some of the problems I've said, and I think it gets around some of them, but not all of them, is to say that at base there is an immaterial aspect to material, and this immaterial aspect gets us some degree of irreducible goodness. Moral values are basic. You can't investigate beneath them, they're just basic. If you ask, how did this object become good, it's a silly question. It just is good. Well, how did it become good? Well, it is good. Good is identical with it. And so it becomes a silly question. I think that's the closest to a strong answer you can get for naturalism to get around it, but it's the same tautology that we have. If you get it otherwise, you constantly run the risk of relativism. And I recommend my article, What's Wrong with Relativism, on my blog, intelligentchristianfaith.com.
Blog again?
intelligentchristianfaith.com. I think she... Did you want to follow up on this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure nature is good. I don't
Okay.
know. I'm confused about exactly what that term
Okay.
good means, I guess, from where
Good
I'm.
might be derivative from natural processes.
Well, I mean, I think that we, as human beings, as people that I can see, as opposed to a phantom, try to, discuss and figure out, kind of like, we might. I don't know what the perfect highway system is, but we, try to figure it out and, discuss it.
Assuming
and so
people
on.
should survive and not kill each other on the roadways.
Right. I mean,
Why should we assume that, given nature?
I think the should is constructed by our human preferences.
Okay.
I mean, but for me, that's a lot more freeing than, okay, you have to follow this God just because. Instead of that, I can look at other human beings, we can talk, we can reason. And yes, both are fairly difficult, but one at least seems a lot more based in reality and not on a phantom.
Okay, I think most of my talk addresses the position you took and challenges some of the things you said, so I won't try to repeat that. But I think you're dealing at a practical level or a normative level, and I'm trying to deal at a meta-ethical level. And the challenge there is, my wife gave me a great illustration. If you ask a 13-year-old, where does money come from? They might say, well, you just go to the bank, you get money. And as far as they know, that's the answer. And in a sense, they're right. You can get money from a bank. But where did the bank get the money? And not just bills and coins, where did they get the value that is ascribed to that? Did the banks generate that just by themselves? Well, no, you've got a big complex process behind it. All economic factors, you've got stocks and bonds and investments, you've got employment and taxes and wages and all that. All of that's going on in this big, massive system that generates market forces that inform the government, which inform the Fed, which generate how much money will be doled out to banks, and then they make investments and so on. And round to the end, the bank doesn't produce the money. The bank is just the distributor of money. And I would suggest nature is the bank of moral values. It's not producing them. It's just where we get them from. And naturalists can still get it from the same place we get it, at least in terms of these natural values, not getting into sophisticated religious scriptural stuff. But we can still get values from there. But that doesn't tell us where they came from. That doesn't tell us how they got there in the first place. I think there was another question.
I'm just confused. If God is transcendent and God created nature, then why did he create a jerk?
I'm sorry?
If God is transcendent and he created nature, then why did he create a jerk?
Let's suppose Genesis 1 through 3 is telling something broadly true, not counting age of the earth and all that dispute. From a biblical Christian perspective, God didn't make creation fallen. You've got at least two causal sources for the fallenness of nature that are that are consequences of sin, evil, fallenness, mistakes, whatnot. You've got the angelic fall and you've got the Adamic fall. If the question is if God created nature, why did he make a jerk? I think it's a complex question. I don't think he made a jerk. I think we introduced the jerkish elements of it. What's that?
But that's the premise of your talk, is that nature is a jerk.
It is
and
a
we
jerk.
don't have control
I think
over
nature is a jerk. I don't think God created it a jerk.
But we don't have control over aging. We don't have control over enthalpy. We don't have control over physics. So how then if God didn't create it and he is all-powerful, but we didn't create gravity, we didn't create aging, we didn't create enthalpy, which is the net result of everything that causes us to die and to change. So then, if God didn't create it, but you're saying we created it, how did we create enthalpy and entropy?
A question was asked in an editorial a while back, what's wrong with the world? And the idea was they're going to get responses from all of their readership. This is back in the days of newspapers when people actually had paper newspapers, and they got their news from sources that might be days old, maybe even weeks old. And they got their responses. People wrote in, and one of the answers was ridiculously short. It was only two words. One of the answers to the question of what's wrong with the world came in from a guy named G.K. Chesterton. What's wrong with the world? His answer, I am. And it's easy to see the fault in other people and to try to say God did this wrong or other folks. And perhaps, I'm answering it. But the first step in accounting for the wrongness in the world is taking responsibility for our part in the wrongness of the world. What's wrong with the world? I was rude to my wife the other day.
So
That's my part of it. I'm responsible for that.
How did Honey Badger suddenly, how are you responsible for Honey Badger not giving a damn?
I would suggest that the angelic fall offers an explanatorily helpful account. It's very theological, though. I'm not going to prove it with philosophy. If we're granting, for the sake of argument, Genesis 1 through 3, then we already have fallen angels, namely one influencing the serpent, tempting Adam and Eve, and so on. And if it's able to influence animals, namely a snake, then the honey badger isn't that far off.
So you're saying that all animals in nature are influenced by the angelic fall?
That's one potential explanation that, for all we know,
Okay, but
explains
if we
some
go
of
back
that,
to
yeah.
God being, and if we go back to God being all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful, then how then would he not have been able to control, if not understand, if not allow the angelic fall? And if so, then by doing that, then he allows for all of the failures of animals, including
How good
ourselves.
of a good is free will? How valuable, in your estimation, is free will?
Here's the crux of my issue is that you are applying a personification to nature in and of itself, where you're applying human constructs to things that don't actually apply.
How valuable is free will? Because if you don't think that free will is very valuable, then a lot of the suffering in the world is going to look arbitrary and superfluous.
I'm not talking about
I'm trying to
humans.
introduce something that might help explain your original question.
I'm not actually
But I need to
talking-
know how much you value it. If you don't think it's very valuable, then this isn't going to help
I
explain
believe
much.
100% in free will. I'm not talking
Okay.
about free will. I am talking about animals
Yes.
having. How is my
The
free will
angelic
going
fall
to?
is a category of free will. It's just dealing with beings that don't normally get brought into the discussion because it's a very theological
But
assertion.
did God not allow that to happen? Mm-hmm. That was a gift, right? So free will was a gift given
Free
to
will is a
us through
great
the
good.
angelic
Yeah.
fall.
If you're going to
Ergo,
fault the story,
God controlled that.
I'll use an explanation I gave, an illustration I gave when I debated David Smalley. Oftentimes, folks judge Christian theism for delaying heaven too long and then interrupting the story to say this is a terrible book when you've only flipped halfway through it, so to speak. If you're going to leave the eternal chapter of heaven out of the equation, then of course it doesn't add up. It's not supposed to add up shy of the conclusion of the story. That is a happy ending. It's going to look very tragic shy of the ending.
Okay.
But that is a faith claim. I'm not claiming there's no faith involved, but I don't think it's an unreasonable claim.
So how does Honey Badger Don't Care play into your greater scheme of heaven?
Okay. According to Genesis 3, you're familiar with the story, I assume?
am.
Okay. Do you remember where it says that the thorns and thistles were first introduced?
Okay.
Do you remember that point? And
okay.
what was the precipitating cause for that?
So I'm trying to get you to answer the question: how does angelic fall and the
Free will.
granting of free will equate to nature being a jerk and it mattering?
Okay.
Nature in and of itself is not, you're personifying nature to be a jerk, but nature is. It just is. It is an acceptance. And the thing that I have a problem with is you talk about naturalists saying that we can get morality from this and that we should take morality from this. You ask a naturalist, they're going to all say, yep, nature is a jerk. It's a pain in the ass sometimes to get old. It's hard when people die. It is all of those things. So you're not having somebody disagree with that.
But when
What
you
I'm
press
trying
it
to
deeper-
understand is where you're getting the fact that this is a poor morality aspect and that somehow nature is a poorer substandard morality than yours. When you're applying this to not just
That-
one
that wasn't
species,
the
there are
claim of
billions
my-
of species out there.
Can I respond? Because I'm going to
Absolutely.
lose it.
Absolutely. No, go
I do
crazy.
this
Go
with my
crazy.
wife all the time.
No, go crazy.
She's got a sustained thought. It's this long,
Go
and
crazy.
I forgot my thought right here.
Knock
and
yourself
by the
out.
time she's done, I forgot what I was going to say.
Knock
It's
yourself
brilliant,
out.
I'm sure, but who knows? The premise of the talk wasn't a defense of Christian theistic ethics, and so I didn't really prepare all of my work there. I do have some articles that address it.
I've read them. I just read them over there.
Oh, great, great. I think I had like 6 of them.
I read
posted.
the 3 that you had with
Oh,
nature
good,
being
good.
a jerk.
Okay, now
Or 2 with you,
the
yeah.
jerk one, the core of it wasn't simply that nature is a jerk, although that's the title, that's a big part of it. But underneath even that, I don't know that you can even get moral oughts. I don't think morality is even possible given naturalism. And so it's what we would expect, that nature would act like a jerk. Nature acting like a jerk is consistent with someone who doesn't really care or have any interest in generating moral stuff. Now, we do have moral stuff. Do you grant that we have moral stuff? It's not a vast illusion. Morality is telling us something about reality. Do you agree with that?
I actually don't understand your question.
Do you agree that morality isn't a total illusion? There's
I agree
something to
morality
morality.
is a construct within our Homo sapien species, yes.
Okay, so you're suggesting relativism.
I am suggesting that you have different types of morality. You look at communalism, you look at symbiosis, you look at different types of both intra and extra specific cooperation, and you've seen that through the biological record. When it suits and when it is good for a species or a population or a community in which they cooperate together, yes, you have a de facto kind of loose morality. Loose if you apply the fact that morality is a human construct as opposed to an animalistic construct.
Okay, so it sounds like you described a brand of what's called relativism. Some people use different terms. I'm not trying to use it as an insulting term, but it's a brand of relativism. Some of the challenges that relativism face have led a lot of people to look for something else, look for what's called objectivism, to where you've got moral facts that are just true. If all of society said, okay, let's go kill a whole race of people, they're still wrong. Even if the whole convention of them agreed, even if practically it made for a more evolutionarily evolved Aryan race, it's still wrong. Now, the only way that knowledge we have of its wrongness could be true is if there's an ought that isn't just some arbitrary opinion. It has to correspond to a reference point. This wrongness can only correctly be wrong if it correctly corresponds to something about reality that says that shouldn't be. But reality doesn't say what should or shouldn't be. Now, my suggestion is very minimal, that it seems the best hope to have an ought is if you've got a mind. It could be that Christianity is totally wrong and my thesis still works. My suggestion is that you have to have a mind that's beyond culture, still mental, but it's beyond culture, and it's able to suggest or say or dictate what should be and what shouldn't be. I don't see that nature does that in any way that escapes any of the problems I've suggested. And so that's one problem. That's one issue. Now, to get to the Christian ethics critique, one of the best responses I've heard that's pretty comprehensive. I was giving out little bits of an explanation, but not bringing it together. If free will is a great good, and if the heaven story as described in Christianity is retained in our explanation, and if we have freedom in heaven, what would it take for a people to have unending time, unlimited freedom, and never use it for evil? What's it going to take for us to learn our lesson about the abuses of free will so well that we never abuse free will and do evil with it? And if your answer wouldn't work with a teenager, then it won't work with a whole society, much less all of humanity across history. If your answer to that question is that, well, you just need to punish them, that works sometimes, sometimes it doesn't. You need to educate them. That works sometimes, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe if you killed them before they got really bad, that works sometimes, sometimes it doesn't. What if, and each effort you do, it kind of looks like the various answers we might even try to offer to resolve that problem, if it was just a thought experiment. It looks potentially just like what human history looks like. How are we going to learn once and for all never to misuse our free will? I think that thought experiment might look exactly like human history looks. That's from Clay Jones.
But
It's
so
a pretty
how does
heady
that
thought,
play-
and he can
how does
defend
that
it better than I
play
could.
into the personification of nature?
What's that?
So how does that play into the I'm having a problem with your premise.
The
Your premise-
personification of nature is
Yeah,
a jerk?
because you've basically personified
yeah.
nerd. Okay, so let me
Yeah,
go
it's
back.
a rhetorical device. I don't think nature's a person. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because that was a big problem I was
But
having.
calling it a jerk is people get the
It's
point. Yeah.
catchy.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So let's go back to this like annihilation and nature does this thing.
Yeah.
So you have sea anemones.
On what?
You have sea anemones. They give out a
Sea
neurotoxin.
anemones.
You
Okay.
give out a
I thought you
neurotoxin.
said CNBC, and I'm like, no, I don't
No.
watch that.
I thought you said you did.
C-SPAN.
you said- oh,
I watch it
C-SPAN.
for about 2
Oh,
minutes.
okay.
I don't really watch it.
Okay. So you
I'm
have
not a
sea
good enough
anemones.
citizen.
They give out a neurotoxin that kill fish.
Mm-hmm.
However, they have a mutualistic society with clownfish.
Mm-hmm.
And the clownfish exist there perfectly happy. They're defensive. They clean up, all of that. According to you, nature's a jerk, and that doesn't work.
If we were to take
How would you apply that then?
descriptions of that behavior and try to map it into our ethics, that would be jerk behavior.
Why?
Why? Killing people you don't agree with, I consider to be jerk behavior. Yeah.
But they have a mutualistic, agreed upon kind of
That includes killing each other?
coordination. Humans kill each other.
Yeah, and I think it's jerk behavior too. I'll try not to kill you, by the way. I respect your
but,
life.
I mean, humans kill each other.
Terrible.
You said you suggested to the biologist that he not talk to feminists.
Oh, no. I didn't say he shouldn't talk to feminists. I said he shouldn't bumble into it like I have. I think he needs to go into it much more tactfully and with much more understanding and respect than I did. And I really, they fed me my lunch. I mean, it wasn't like I lost the logical argument, but there wasn't a logical argument going on. There was just a lot of useless, I didn't get very far. My interest going in there got lost as I just kind of had to duck and cover and run. Because I offended them pretty early.
Was it logical?
No. Because I offended them unnecessarily, and that was a jerk move on my part. I shouldn't have offended them unnecessarily.
So you're like nature and you're a jerk.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. Just checking.
You can ask my wife; she'll tell you. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't mean to be. I hopefully am charming enough to make up for it.
Submitted online by the head of sociology that asked to remain anonymous.
Okay.
Big school,
Big
big
question
school,
already.
yeah. If society functions as the litmus that defines what is true, then in a melting pot society whereby Group A society says, if you disagree with me, then I'm justified in beheading you. Group B society says, we can disagree and both keep our heads. Whose definition of truth is the most true?
Whose definition of truth? If I don't, it's getting very conjectural. I'm not sure I grant the if in the first place. Can you go over it one more time? Because right when they said if, I'm like,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't think I grant the
If
premise.
right, and I think that's his
Yeah.
sarcasm. If society functions as the litmus that defines
Okay.
what is true,
I got it.
then in a melting pot society whereby Group A society says, if you disagree with me, then I'm justified in beheading you.
Okay.
Group B society says, we
Okay.
can disagree and both keep our heads. Whose definition of truth is the most true?
Okay. So the question is a good one. And it's a penetrating question for, in particular, cultural relativism, which is also called sometimes ethical relativism, which isn't a very helpful something. Cultural relativism or conventionalism. One of the big problems with conventionalism is that groups of people can agree on something that's wrong. And groups of people can agree on something that's kind of good. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, depends on the situation. And other groups disagree, and maybe it's kind of right, maybe it's kind of wrong. And then when they come together and they feud over it, who's to arbitrate this? Cultural relativism doesn't have a transcultural reference point to mediate between whose ethical standards are right and whose are wrong. Anti-Semitism is not right as far as we would normally understand it, but according to Nazi Germany, it was right. Who are we to judge? Isn't that anachronistic to force our standards on a different society? Who are we to judge? Who are we to tell them? Well, we are people who know moral truth. We've got to leverage that that we can push against the whole world. This is why the moral revolutionary can speak out and be right, even if he's the only one who notices what's wrong. Even if he's the only one with enough courage of conviction to stand up and say, women should be treated with respect. I don't care what this law says. And I don't care how many people throw food at me. That moral revolutionary can still be right and push against the whole world and have truth on his side, because morality is not just a matter of group opinion. And the group opinion of it, you've seen it used and abused in the past, I'm sure. You can probably think of whole societies that had a moral norm, a moral convention that wasn't very moral ultimately. Good question.
All right, so when you're discussing naturalism, it's kind of two-part question. So when you're discussing naturalism,
Okay.
are you looking at evolution or evolutionary thought being a part of that consistently, or only factoring in from time to time? And then the second part of the question is, if you're looking at naturalism or naturalistic ethics involved with abortion, since you were in the introduction, you're mentioning you're very pro-life.
I am.
Would you say someone who is pro-abortion, obviously going with naturalistic ethics, doesn't care because nature is a jerk, but if you look from evolutionary standpoint, to be evolutionary successful, you need to pass on your genes and therefore have children. So how would you look at abortion coinciding with naturalism and evolutionary? Do you think it's, when you're studying and researching it, does it work together or does it not?
There's a lot going on in that question. Big topics. One of them I've studied at great length. The other two I haven't studied with as much depth. I've studied abortion a great deal. Naturalism and evolution, I admit I'm not a scientist. I approach it as a philosopher of science. I think if I were a naturalist and a pro-choice advocate, I might agree with, I forget his name, Margaret Sanger's son wrote a book in support of pro-choice policy and pro-choice ethics. And he appeals to evolutionary biology. He's a naturalist, he's an atheist to my knowledge, and he refers to evolution to explain some of the things that we've gotten, and then he stops at some point and says evolution has made women's bodies this way, it's made men with this kind of psychology, it's made these social dynamics that disadvantage women. Evolution might explain some of that, but then he has to stop at some point and I think agree with Richard Dawkins and say, as best we can, we should not make our policies evolutionary, because evolution doesn't generate progress, it just generates change. It doesn't make things better or worse, it just makes things different. And with respect to our morals, wherever we got them from, it can go for or against them. Evolution could make it so that in our Enlightenment era, where we've got divorce rates getting higher, we've got abortion rates that have been around 1 million a year just in America. We've got contraceptives that enable people to have sex without having to worry about getting pregnant, or at least not as much. And this has radically revolutionized our approach to family. Interestingly enough, the folks that are most adherent to evolutionary naturalism oftentimes have the lowest birth rates and are kind of disadvantaging themselves evolutionarily for the future in light of, say, Islam, where you can have up to 4 wives, and oftentimes the birth rate's a lot higher. Or I don't know that Hinduism is growing in number, but China and India have the highest populations. Islam's growing. They're getting more converts to, say, the nuns and the secular affiliates. But they're not necessarily producing more babies. So evolutionarily, that kind of works against some of evolutionary naturalism. I'm not sure that evolution can be escaped too easily for a naturalist, because there's more going on in naturalism than evolution. You can study astrophysics, and evolution isn't going to really help you that much. It's just not describing what's going on out there. But you can do it without appeal to a God and be an atheist and naturalist there. So you might have other things you can appeal to for morality, but if you're going to get to moral stuff, you're probably going to have to bring the conversation back to biology, where you get animals and you get people. And that's going to bring you back into the domain of evolution. And so I'm not sure you can really escape the red tooth and claw of evolution, even if you otherwise might have a lot of material besides evolution to appeal to. Does that help?
Kind of. I mean, when you I guess going back to the naturalistic and evolution, do you, when you're looking at that, do you consistently think of them together, or do you kind of factor it in? Because when you're talking, it sounded like it was just a portion on occasion that would come in as far as the ethics. I know it's just an aspect, biology background, so that's fine.
So your question is,
when you're coming up with your definition for naturalistic ethics, are you using the aspect of evolution, which, yes, is very pervasive? Okay.
I'm not importing evolution into my basic assumption of naturalistic ethics. I'm using it to critique naturalistic ethics. Okay. I'm not bringing it in underneath and working it into the definition. I'm trying to use sort of a neutral definition. Naturalistic ethics is ethics with no appeal to supernature, whatever that may be. And where are you going to get your the furniture to fill out that moral house? Are you going to get it from animal behavior? Are you going to get it from the stars? Are you going to get it from instincts? You're going to get it from the dirt? Where are you going to get it from? There's a lot of things besides evolution a naturalist might appeal to, but because they're dealing with something that seems to be dealing in animal behavior, namely humans, it tends to bring it back to evolution, and you still end up with the red tooth and claw there. Okay. And that's where it comes back in. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so maybe I should. This
my
isn't
wife.
as
She
much a
has the
question. I
hardest
just have to address this whole
questions.
sea anemone thing because this is really bothering me. That if you're really saying that this is where we should get some of our ethics from, you basically have. Okay, so the idea of an ethics isn't necessarily saying this person is never nice. I'm sure that there are lots of little KKK grandmas baking cookies for the little white supremacist in the neighborhood. That does not make her a good person. If you have a sea anemone that has one specific fish that it's saying it's okay for you to live here, that's not an ethic. You basically have a clownfish supremacist anemone there. That's not an ethic that we need to import.
Hitler was a strong advocate for his family. He was very loyal to his family, and loyalty is still a good thing, even if he was a terrible person.
Last question.
Okay.
Again, congratulations on the Theology Illustrated Award.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How can we pray for you, your amazing wife, and your continued ministry elsewhere?
I'm sorry.
How
Was that
can
the
we-
last
how can-
question?
yeah, that's-
Oh, that was the last question.
That's
I
it.
was waiting for another question.
No.
So do you have another question? Is that it?
That's it. How can we pray for you?
Okay. I'm sorry?
How can we?
I couldn't hear you. I thought you said let me pray for you.
No, how can we pray for you?
Oh gosh. Equal portions of wisdom and truth. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. Wisdom and love. I think wisdom's going to deal heavily in truth anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. John Ferrer.
Thank you.